Hey, Neil McDonnell here. We're going to get started with LinkedIn Live in just a second. I'm going to bring up a slide while I'm having people join in. One thing I wanted to mention for those of you who are here early, first off, I'll mention thank you. I appreciate you coming early or on time to a 12 o'clock session every day, 12 to 12:30. We've been doing this a long time, so much that I can't remember now, but we passed our 50 session mark a couple weeks back. And each one of these trainings are great because I get to meet new people who have new questions. But one of the things I wanted to mention before we get started is that if you haven't seen the LinkedIn post I did today, I posted out something from the Army. And this post, I'll show it in a second, but this post I put out the Army Force Management Model. And the reason I put it out, and I really liked it, was because it was an infographic that I put out. And when you look at it, you get this high level overview of what the Army teaches their leaders about what we do in the Army and how we do it, et cetera. And through this infographic, I then was introduced to actually a new component of the Army or a new office in the Army that I wasn't aware of. And inside of there, I found their training document. It's like 500 pages, but it's what they get, this manual they give to the leaders. And so it's updated, I think, 2022 or something like that. But it's 500 pages, and I wasn't going to put it on, but I felt like, you know what, if you go down that thread, you can find it. But I love this idea of the ability to do our homework, right? When we do our homework and we can speak our customers' language more, then we really can, we win more business, frankly. And so if you're selling to the Army, go take a look at today's post. It's got a really good model, all sorts of rabbit hole type paths you can follow to learn a lot more information. So we're going to get started here in a second. Hi, I'm Neil McDonnell with the GovCon Chamber of Commerce. I have been doing these LinkedIn Lives as a way to share process and procedures for you to become successful in the federal market, whether that's just getting your first 100,000 or getting your first 10 million. It's the same thing. A process is a process is a process. And the only difference is we scale up in the dollars that we're pursuing. And so I do this every day, 5 o'clock, 12 to 12:30. And today, we're going to be talking about contract vehicles. There's hundreds of thousands of them. So how do you pick the right one? Before I get started, I will tell you a little bit about me in case you don't know. I spent 20 years as a small business owner in the federal space. I had 2 successful companies, and then I sold them and started the GovCon Chamber of Commerce specifically to really drive home that government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. And when we follow the process, we achieve the success we hope for. And today, the process step I'm going to talk about is how do I begin to look at contract vehicles? This is not an in-depth training session. In fact, for this particular topic, I'll talk about it from a high level, but if you want to go down deep into the weeds of actually which contract vehicles are best for you, one person I just think of constantly in this space off the top of my head is Eileen Kent. And so I'll tag her on LinkedIn in the comments a little later, but definitely follow up with her because that's a big part of her expertise and what she offers her customers is research into exactly target agency, target vehicles, et cetera. So my purpose today is to give you this high level understanding of how you choose it. I wanted to talk about somebody who's a member of the GovCon Chamber of Commerce, member of the LinkedIn Live world that we're in. Dan, he and I were talking recently, and this is kind of what inspires me to tell this story about contract vehicles. But he and I were talking, and he's getting into the federal space and trying to decide, well, how do I decide which agency to go after? I know you talk about going after a primary agency. How do I know which one to go after? And this relates to contract vehicles because there's no point looking at all contract vehicles. You might as well look at only the ones that fit or are used by your target agency. And one of the things that I was saying, and I did a whole video on this, and you can find this on the LinkedIn Live replays, but I did this whole video that talks about the way you find your primary agency is you look at it from a couple different angles. So I told him I was in the Army. It makes sense that I might go after the Army because I can speak their language. I understand what the Army's mission is, et cetera. I'm a vet, and I've done a lot of work with the Department of Veterans Affairs. That might be a good primary agency for me. And so I was talking with Dan saying, well, what about you? You know, I would stay out of DOD if you're new to it, spend the first 3 years in the civilian side, then come over to DOD if you have no presence already here. And then how do you choose which civilian agency to go after? And my favorite thing is to start with the biggest one, because the biggest one means there's a huge pool of money potentially that you can get access to that allows you to grow $100,000 at a time until you're at $1 million at a time until you're at 10 million. And civilian agencies go down in size. And so I'm going to share some screens that I want to walk you through. I don't want to just talk about it here. I want to show you the actual data and how do I look at it. I don't spend a ton of time going in because I am definitely of the agile way of thinking, agile software development, et cetera, is we move fast, right? Some of us call it failing fast, and failing is not that didn't work, but sometimes failing just means it didn't work for me. I don't want that. I thought I wanted it, but I don't. So an example is I just pick a primary agency. I go on high level data and evidence that gives me an understanding, and I'm going to show you that in a second. And then I make the decision. I start going through to see if it works, but I give it 6 or 12 months. I don't give it a day and then change to a different agency. So with Dan, what I was recommending to him is that in other areas, he deals with customers on the healthcare side. And I said, well, you might look at HHS, right? They're a huge organization. They're completely small business friendly. And they got enough money to be able to accommodate anything you could possibly want to grow, right? Certainly until you hit the $100 million mark. And so anyways, that's how I talked about it. I want to show you some of the tools you might be able to use going forward. And so before I do, though, I want to just do a high level. Let me share my screen here. So I'm going to share my screen here. I love that thing. There's my daily topic tips. Okay, so this is an older deck that I did when the GovCon Chamber of Commerce was called the HubZone Chamber of Commerce. I don't need to go through that whole story, but back then I built a deck that talked about contract vehicles, especially as it related to best in class, et cetera. You can go look at that. It's still relevant for a good introduction thing. But one of the first things I showed people was just understand category management. And for those of you who are not familiar, there's 19 categories, and 10 of them are called common goods and services that are used by almost every agency or every agency. And then the defense specific ones are only used by Department of Defense. So like weapons and ammo or aircraft, ships and subs. So having a good understanding of which category you fall into will then lead to your ability to find out, well, which contract vehicles. So an example is if you're in professional services, I think there's like 100,000 contract vehicles in the professional services world alone. So then you start working your way down. Like here's legal services. I had somebody contact me recently saying, asking me questions about doing business in the federal space on the legal side. And we'll chat about it, but I don't know the legal side a lot, but I do know research. And so I'm able to go through and find contract vehicles. Where is it buying? Actually, I know a lot about the legal side from working with the White House and other people, but I'm not a lawyer, so I don't speak to that. So coming in, one of the other things that I did is I just said, look, this is an older deck, so some of these things are out of date, but basically it's the same, right? I talked about the categories and common goods above. Now I'm looking at best in class contract vehicles, and I'll explain what those are in a minute. But here I can look and go, well, this is where the government is trying to drive a lot of the agencies to spend. If they're going to be driving them to spend, I don't need to argue all day long about whether this is good or bad. That's not my job. And more importantly, I don't really have any ability to influence that. But I do have the ability to go out and find somebody on NASA Soup and say, hey, can I be on your team? So when you go forward looking at contract vehicles and you're looking at primary agencies, and again, I'll show you something in a second on the agency spend, but look back at the, come on, don't do that. This one, look back on this one, common goods, and make sure you understand which category do you fall under. And then, some of you might fall into 2, but if you're falling into more than 2, then I would really, and you're under 10 million, I would really reevaluate how you're marketing what you sell and what you think you sell, because it's really just spread too thin, in my opinion. Okay, so let's come back through these guys. So this one is what I was trying to show you. So in here, the contract vehicles, I talked about there's hundreds of thousands of contract vehicles out there. So many that the government doesn't even really know. It's one of the reasons that they're trying to do this thing called best in class, or manage the contract vehicles better, so they do a better job with taxpayer dollars, right? I'm not getting into that. You can watch this whole video where I talk about it. But contract vehicles fall into a few categories. Tier 0 are these unmanaged contracts that are down at the agency level, office level, whatever. And they call them the Wild West of the government contracts. Or maybe I called that. This is like 3-4 years ago. But it's the Wild West of the government contracts. There's no coordinated management, right? And if you're familiar with a maturity model that goes from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is definitely at the 0 and 1 level. So as you move forward, though, the government has something called spend under management. And spend under management just means we want to manage how we're spending, right? I'm not trying to be a spend under management expert here. In fact, I got the GSA lining up with the GSA to be able to come on and do some series of LinkedIn Lives with me where they can really talk specifics of spend under management with you. But the idea of this, before I go further, is that if the red is the Wild West, it basically is unmanaged. Now, obviously, the contracting officer and the Corps who are running that program manager, they're managing it, but it's not managed according to a set of standards that they have. Spend under management, or SUM, has established criteria. And so tier 1 is where the bulk of the SUM are. And these are contract vehicles that are focused on a single agency or even a single command. Like I know of one in Transcom that I'm thinking off the top of my head, $175 million contract vehicle just for Transcom, one command within Department of Defense. As you move forward, contract vehicles then go into this tier 2. This is the next level of sophistication. And these are actually ones that you can almost think that they're on deck to go up to bat for going to the best in class type contract vehicles. Tier 2 contract vehicles are contract vehicles that can be used by multiple agencies. And at that point, it makes sense because now everything's not being done in silos. We're beginning to break down those silos and spread them out. Sometimes you can find government-wide acquisition contracts, they call them GWACs, in this tier 2 range. When I built this little visual here, I put GWACs right in the middle with tier 3. And what I should have probably put there is BIC, best in class. So tier 3 is that those 40 or so contract vehicles that have been determined best in class, used by anybody, basically, or could be used by anybody, but certainly they're the agencies that are signing on to use it, they're encouraging the spend. The only thing I want you to take away from this slide is that when you look at where you want to go for contract vehicles, two ways of looking at this. One is there's contract vehicles everywhere, and if you can get on them and there's the government's spending on them, get on them. But the ones you really want to be looking at is anything that is considered a tier 3 or best in class contract vehicle. Find out if what you sell would fit on that world and either get on it as a prime. Sometimes it's got on-ramping, whatever, or more likely just get on it as a teammate. And that is totally doable on almost any contract vehicle you show me. I can show you how to get on a team. If you bring something of value, right? You can't just bring your want, but if you bring something of value, then you can do that. This last thing is I'll just show you. This is that message I've been telling you, right? A while ago, they weren't spending much on best in class, and a ton of money was being spent down in the tier 0. Now they're trying to reverse it and to begin to, and it makes sense to me. I know there's all this dialogue, but basically they want to be able to just spend their money wiser. They have to figure out how to do that and not punish small businesses or, shrink the pool of competitors down unfairly, but it makes sense that they want to manage it. There's my fancy little graphic that goes around. You don't need to see that. Okay. And so this deck was just, if you go back and watch this video on YouTube where I have it, you'll see that it lays out all the contract vehicles. Okay, so let's come over here. Well, actually, before I go to this, let me show you one other slide. This one, or not slide. So I'm in USA Spending. Again, this is not a training class on USA Spending. Today's LinkedIn session is just about, with all these contract vehicles, how do I choose which ones I want? And so my first tip for how to do that is to go after best in class. Actually, if that spend under management best in class little circle diagram I did made sense to you, can you just give it a thumbs up and let me know that it's making sense? So coming into this next thing I want to show you is this is a graph that shows a lot of information. This is 2017 data, but basically it's the same every year. The government, forget all that $1 trillion stuff anybody ever talks about. the government spends between $500 and $600 billion on contract, right? Federal contracts. The rest of the money is earmarked in a different way. So when you look at that money, one interesting thing to just pay attention to is of the $500 or $600 billion that is contracted out every year, there's a certain percentage of it that's not competed, and that almost a ton of it is all, obviously you can see in the pink here, in DoD, right? They're not going to compete out heavily rockets and weapon systems, aircraft carriers, or whatever. So that's a big amount of spend, and it can only go to a single vendor or a couple, right? Everybody teams up under Lockheed, or everybody teams up under Northrop Grumman. Anyways, the reason I wanted to look at this one and show you this is that you can see right here, first up, at a high level, you can see how much money is in DoD, right? If I was advising people on the federal side, and I am advising you on the federal side, I always say get into the DoD. But like with Dan, I mentioned earlier, he's not in the federal government or have any presence in DoD. And so I told him, just plan for that 5 years from now, right? You're building a long-term company. I'm not here to make anybody or help anybody become an overnight success. I'm not interested in that. I'm here to help you become an overnight success in 10 years. The idea, though, is because he doesn't have money or presence in DoD, I'm saying just wait on that. So if you're in DoD, you can get in there, but you can see that they're the big spender, and I'll break that down for you. But when I'm choosing which contract vehicles to go after, I look at which, let me see where the dollars are. Well, it doesn't really matter because I think I can hover above it. What I look at is what's my primary agency? And this is why I drive home this idea of a primary agency. And no offense to HUD, right? But if I come down to HUD, if I come down here to HUD and I hover, HUD's got basically a $1 billion budget, right? $1 billion. And so when you think about people working in there, who's going after it, the pool of money is $1 billion. And when you come up, and you can see, that's common across other areas. But when you come up and look at the top agencies, like Department of Energy, 27 times more than HUD. And so if I'm in the Department of Energy going into any of their labs to support them, when I learn in one lab, I can make more money in that lab. And when I do success there, I can move on to another lab, and everything that I've done before, these people will value. But when I'm doing something in HUD and then I go to Treasury, it's not always related, and you're constantly having to learn a new mission. It's not that you shouldn't support these other ones, but especially when you're getting started, I would recommend in your first $10 million path that you be looking at an agency that could easily expand to where you're at. You could almost subcontract just $10 million, right? So anyways, energy is an interesting one, because if you look at some of the data, you might think, oh, they're not small business friendly. Department of Energy is very small business friendly. The problem is the data for so long was not reported as small business dollars, because most of what energy spends is through these GOCOs or COCOs or GOCOs. Anyways, it means government owned, contractor operated, right? And so these huge labs, the government's like, look, you guys operate it. And so they've given them the entire budget to manage it. And then when they're bringing subcontractors in, small businesses in, the large prime contractor is doing it. So it doesn't get reflected as energy spending as much with small businesses, but because they're spending it through larges, they really are doing a very good job working with smalls and embracing what smalls can offer to Department of Energy. Anyways, I digress. So when you look at this list, though, forget about DoD for a second, right? I already said it's huge. And when I show you in a second, DoD, if it was fairly balanced with these other agencies, DoD would be broken into Department of the Army, Department of Air Force, Department of Navy, right? So then those three, you would see this blue line be divided in three and be a lot closer to energy. So Veteran Affairs, HHS are these huge ones. This is where I would be recommending people play. So coming back to this, the first thing I would look at and identify is your primary agency. And it's okay if you go to state. Anna Ehrman's going to kill me if I say that you should go over and support state. But but whatever agency you look at, when you look at it, the first step is go look at those best-in-class vehicles in particular and go, is the Department of State or is VA using any of these in particular? So from those, you've got a baseline. But remember, there's a ton of contract vehicles. So let me come over here. I just want to show you this other way of looking at the money. So when I talk about how much money is being contracted out of Department of Defense, you can see that they've got 369 billion being spent. And down here, you can see what the Army, Navy, and Air Force are spending. You can see this breakdown. Just coming back really quick to this guy. So energy has got a 27.2. And I did this whole infographic. Actually, if you want it, I can show you how the spend's broken down in a way that's friendly to small businesses. Let me know if you want that. But 27 billion is what energy spends, and they're the highest department, the highest agency, whatever you want. They're the second below defense. And every one of the departments is spending more. This is a reason I like going into the Army and Navy. But that said, you can come in here and I said HHS as an example. I can look in here and see that there's significant spend. You remember I talked about Department of Labor, I think, or HUD. HUD has a $1 billion spend. Well, here I'm looking at HUD, HHS, their top components or agencies have a significantly bigger one. So NIH has a 5 billion, CDC has 6 billion. So when you look at this money, the reason I like it is because there's just this constant spend. Let me know if you want me to put these links later on in chat. I'm not going to do them now, but I can put them in the comments if you guys want links to this data. So the last thing I'm going to do is, let's say we chose the agency, right? I told you to choose which agency is out there. The next thing you need to do is to go look at the data. And so what I did, and I'm just going to tell you how I did it, and I'm going to show you 100,000 contract vehicles. All I did was went into USA spending, right? I'm not, again, I was saying, if you want to go much deeper dive, go into somebody who just is passionate about it. But I went in and I just chose fiscal year 2021. If you don't know what USA spending is, it's basically a pretty version of FPDS. FPDS is where all the data is on the spend. This is just the front end that makes it look so much better. Anyways, so I came in and I said, just show me what contract vehicles were continued in 2021. So I chose that and I just had run, and you can see there's 117,000. And I know I'm moving really fast on this topic, but it's, you can go back and rewind, whatever, but it's a lot of information. I noticed I got like 5 minutes left. But I chose 2021 and I said, show me all the contract vehicles. I'm a huge fan of saying, show me everything. I will begin to reduce that raw data into information that's helpful for me. So for example, when I go to SAM, I never search on NAICS codes and say, show me RFIs with this NAICS code. I'm like, forget that. Show me every RFI that's active. And then I have to spend an extra 5 minutes to scroll through, but I can never miss anything, or I will never miss anything. Anyways, long story short, I ran the search, and over here is this download button. And that's where I'm going to take you, is to the spreadsheet. So in this spreadsheet, and let me just show you something really quick. Well, so I highlighted a few, and I'm going to show you in a second, but the two things that you're looking at are the contract vehicle name, kinda, like some of them are really clear, some of them are not, and the number of companies that have been awarded, right? So this FSS contract, you can see it's just a generic GSA type schedule that's out there. All this data, by the way, came from here. Remember I said I downloaded it. Here is the raw data that came out. It's, 30, 40, 50 columns of data. So a lot of data, but I created something called a pivot table, right? And if you don't know how to create a pivot table, by the way, it's insert recommended pivot table and you're done. Just coming back really fast, giving you a quick Excel tip. And so on this pivot table though, they created it. And what I did is I said, sort it by the awardees, because I want to see that. And then I began to just select a couple that I could show you. So by the way, at the bottom, you can see there's 71,000 contract vehicles. In here, I just picked a few to highlight as an example. So Seaport Next Gen is a Navy contract vehicle that's used primarily for engineering services by most of the Navy. There's a lot of discussion on whether different people have to use it or not, but primarily. But you can see there's over 2,000 contract holders. If you're trying to sell into the Navy, then you want to get on Seaport Next Gen. There's no on-ramp right now, so you want to get on a team. Well, you got 2,400 companies you can call and reach out to them. And right here it says awardees. And because this is a pivot table, what it's telling me is that If I went over to contracts and searched just on Seaport Next Gen, it would filter all this out and just show me that. And it would show me a point of contact with a phone number and an email. So I get a lot of people asking me, Neil, how can I find decision makers? Well, this is one way. There's other ways for agencies, but this is one way. So you can see the same thing with Oasis that's in there, the second and third one, and ITES. But here's one for those people who are doing office supplies and furniture. Jim, I don't know if this fits you, but there's a Navy furniture BPA. I might reach out to these people, especially if I'm newer and I'm trying to get into the Navy and sell furniture or something. There's 98 companies listed here that I can now reach out to and ask them about this contract vehicle. Is there room to get on it? I could find the contract officer who's in charge of this and call and say, is there an on-ramp? When will this be coming out again? So there's a lot of stuff, and you can see the same thing. Here's construction services in Oklahoma for this BOA, this basic order agreement. Basically, it's generally no ceiling, and they just throw task orders out. But there's 32 companies. If you're in the Oklahoma area doing construction, these are potentially 32 teaming partners, but it's also a contract vehicle that you want to be paying attention to. Is there an on-ramp, meaning they'll add new people coming up anytime soon? So you got some other stuff that you see. I got a call in the next week. I mean, it might even be tomorrow, but with a lawyer, a business that is a law firm doing business with the federal space, and they were asking me similar questions. Well, I'm able to find 13 contract vehicles and go research them and give them some just quick guidance on, hey, go look at these. And this was just me doing a fast pass at it. One other thing I want to show you on this contract vehicle, by the way, success requires work. Some might call it hard work, right? But success requires work. Scrubbing through tens of thousands of contract vehicles to find the ones that you can then do some additional research, that's just part of the process, right? That's just us working and doing our job. I wanted to show you one other thing that is something to keep in mind is that if I have the number of awardees, if I got rid of everybody and I said, just show me contract vehicles that have just one awardee, I'm able to come in and begin to see what's going on. Something else I'm able to do when I have all these is I can see which contract vehicles were awarded the hub zone or 8A. And if I'm a hub zone and wanting to get into contract vehicles, first off, I might reach out to these people and say, hey, could we team up? Could I offer, I really want to be a good subcontractor to you. And then the other thing is I can watch and go, well, when's it going to expire and come forward again? So I'm running out of time. I know I'm blowing through this really fast. And so the tip I really want to give you is when you think about contract vehicles and which ones should I go after, you want to determine a primary agency, not more than one that's significant or big enough that you can grow, and then go find out what are the top contract vehicles they use. You can do your own research in FPDS, USA Spending. You can also go to your local PTAC, ask for their help, or you can call the small business specialist or a contracting officer and say, here's what we're trying to do. I will tell you, if you don't do your homework before you call the contracting officer or the small business pro, it might cause a level of frustration with them. So don't do that. I'm coming back to my browser here and just checking. Last thing, by the way, if you're on this call and you've got questions about contract vehicles, you want me to send you a link on that best in class contract vehicle video, put a comment in, I'll send you it in messaging or something. And then also, if you'd like links to the data tabs I just shared today, let me know. I know it's a fire hose. If you got a question afterwards, let me know. I'm looking to see if there's other, I see a couple of people asking for the links. So for sure on that. Okay, so I don't see any questions. Hey, government contracting, it's not a secret. It's just a process. Some of the process is hard work, and it'll definitely pay off when you put it forward. And contract vehicles, when you see these things, they're there. They're waiting for you. And those companies are waiting for you to call them so you can join. Hope you have a great day. I'll see you in the next video.